Oh yeah, there's the 6v6 blog, right? Let's read that. Bro, I click on YouTube and there's a fucking Yakuza guy with a on his... Either way, I'm losing my mind. This one has 74k likes. It doesn't matter though. But either way, people are so angry that I was like, ooh, you could be in the same room with a woman without actually having to have sex. No, impossible. He's respecting his wife. Well, I respect my wife by not fucking cheating on her. Anyways, let's get into the blog. Hey everyone, there's been a lot of talk about 6v6 lately, and it's only intensified in recent weeks since we posted our latest director take and made a Twitter post with a promise to talk about. Yep, let's get into it. This is a pretty complex, nuanced topic. Yep. We are in a microcosm of the broader community and discuss this internally. I'm hoping that this piece will serve as an introduction. Okay, let's just get into the thing. Historical context. There have been 3 large format changes to Overwatch, and the first happened shortly after the game launched. This was hero limits. Before this, there could be any number of particular hero on one team. You could have 6 Genjis or 6 Reinhardts. I'll be honest, those were dark times for Overwatch. The only good thing was that, you know, it was a fresh game, so everyone was being silly. But if that was the format right now, I think it would suck. Either way, if my memory serves me right, the winner of Team 4's first internal turn was 1 Winston, 5 Zenyatas. We called it Quinston. Zenyatta orb stacked with no cap. With no cap and healing at a time. It was glorious and terrifying. That sounds really broken. 5 orbs. I don't know how much healing a Zenyatta orb is. How much is it? Like 30, 40? 5 orbs? Like 200? Isn't that like a rank permanently on the Winston? Sounds pretty good. During early development, it was necessary to have duplicate heroes per team. Our first core combat milestone only had 4 heroes. As the roster grew, this was no longer necessary and also introduced issues. Overwatch heroes have very distinct kits with impactful abilities. Stacking abilities could be fun, but it posed challenges to balancing many of those abilities in the game. People reference double barrier, but back then you could have 6. Imagine cycling 6 immortality fields. Yeah, that doesn't sound good. The number of team composition and strategies available was huge. The variety was great, but we didn't feel like we could ever truly balance the game without severely watering down our heroes. So we made the choice to impose a limit of 1 of each hero per team. It's a pretty good and pretty normal. That's why most games don't allow you to have the same hero multiple times, because it would completely break the game. So I completely understand why they set up the limit. At the beginning, it was very silly. It's very fun in a casual sense, but in pro play, you would see some ridiculous compositions. This essentially solved the issue of ability stacking, but it did have a few side effects. It did some of the creativity in putting together team compositions for a more consistent and balanced experience. It also took away some choice from players. Someone wanted to play Tracer, but you were already Tracer. Classy Aaron. That would be unable to. A theme of this in future decisions was limiting match variety as well as player freedom and creativity. I actually can't believe he said the line. I okay. A theme of this in future decision was limiting match variety as well as player freedom and creativity in order to create a more balanced, consistent, competitive experience for players. The other 2 large format changes have a lot of positive benefits but are not as clear cut. The second large change as the game's format was the move from open queue to row queue, which limited team compositions to heroes from each row. Before row queue, there was no enforced 2-2 goats, and players had the freedom to select any row they liked once they loaded into a match. With open queue, teams had a lot of freedom of choice about the heroes and team compositions to play, but there were quite a few problems the row queue intended to address. I want to pitch in my idea. Playing Marvel Rivals without row queue or some sort of row queue, like in League of Legends, absolutely sucks. People keep saying that used to be more creative or whatever. That's wrong. People weren't creative. Everybody ran the same comp in Overwatch. I remember it distinctly. In Rivals, everybody is running 2-2-2. No row queue sucks, because if I solo queue, I will get into a game and I won't be able to play my hero or my row because I'm either forced to swap or I need to beg my teammates to swap because I have 4 DPS. If I'm a tank and we have, you know, another tank player and 4 DPS players, we're gonna have a subpar experience and we probably will lose the game because our DPS cannot play support or our support can't play DPS. Sometimes it's really good when you're lucky to get everybody that plays, you know, the correct role, but most of the time it's not. So I personally enjoy row queue, and I think row queue is pretty good. Teams had a lot of freedom of choice with open queue about what heroes and team compositions to play, but there were quite a few problems the row queue intended to address. Prior to implementing row queue, there was a stark imbalance in the number of people playing each row within each match. The damage was by far the most popular row, and tank was by far the least popular. Yes, exactly my point. In fact, seeing matches with 5 or even 6 damage players on each team was not uncommon. This row imbalance frequently led to wildly imbalanced matches between teams. The game played better with heroes from all 3 rows were selected. Yes. I actually tried playing open queue I actually hated it. I feel like open queue right now is really casual, and back then it was supposed to be taken really serious, and it's really hard to take it seriously when you have 5 Lucio 1 tricks. The disparity caused social issues as players would try to pressure others into playing tank support roles even if they didn't want to. This was actually the reason why I became a tank main, because I was actually a DPS player back in the day. I was forced to pick tank because nobody else would play tank. I was bullied by high-ranking players to go on tank. They were high-ranked DPS players, and I was just, you know, rank 200 and they were rank 1. So obviously I always gave in, and eventually my playtime looked better with Reinhardt, so I played way more Reinhardt. And when I'm loaded into a match with open profiles, people would just relentlessly bully me to pick my main row, even though I just started playing it this season. It made balancing heroes more difficult since we couldn't balance around a certain row ratio for each team, and it even made introducing new heroes more difficult since any new hero kit had taken into consideration hundreds of different team compositions and abilities that could overlap with it. The move to row queue form was aimed to mitigate these challenges. Moving to row queue solved many of these problems and added some additional benefits to the game. With row queue in place, matchmaking is based on skill within a given row, not just skill over row. Some players have wildly different skill ratings per row. I honestly think this is a good change. Row queue also solidified the identity of each row, and the fantasy between that row's job became clearer. However, the switch to row queue system did have some downsides. Longer queue times. I agree, back in the day, queue times were much shorter. Prior to row queue, the matchmaker just needed to find 12 players of similar skill. After row queue, it needed to find 4 players of each row to make a match. The total number of players queuing has no effect on this. It's almost solely governed by the ratio of people queuing for the least popular row. Given the game's lower relative ratio of players queuing for tank than other damage and support rows, queue times went way up. The team tried to address this imbalance in various ways. We introduced a priority pass system that... Oh, remember priority pass? I actually forgot priority pass. Who played low demand rows tank a shorter queue when they switched to damage. This had a positive effect for several weeks, but its influence quickly faded. We also introduced systems to reward players for playing tank, eventually giving them a loot box and a bunch of XP. Yeah, I remember you kept getting rewarded for playing tank. Nobody wanted to play that role. None of these were able to be put on demand for playing DPS. Damage queues times drifted a bit lower over time, but much of this was due to the introduction of open queue competitive and the permanent loss of damage players unwilling to wait that long for a match. There were additional drawbacks with row queue. I mentioned earlier that many of our decisions made improvements to the game at the cost of match variety and player freedom. Team positions were now locked to 2-2-2. This was another step to more consistent experience with Overwatch. There were some pretty exciting metas in the pre-row queue world, and swapping to a hero of different row mid-match was often a much bigger challenge than swapping to one on the same row. Like hero limits, row queue took away a part of the freedom. Could there be an in-between version that solves the original problems without completely solving them, and also isn't quite as restrictive as current row queue? A bit more on that later. I think you could make a system like League where it could be a soft row queue, but you can still swap rows mid-game. You are not locked to play tank, but as long as you know you have 2 of each row that could play the role pretty decently and feel confident. These challenges, as well as longer queue times, led us to the third and most recent major format change, the shift to 5v5. Why we switched to 5v5, blah 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 blah. When we launched Overwatch 2, we talked about the greater individual agency the players could have in 5v5. Overwatch is a team sport and requires players to rely on each other to be successful. This was even more the case previously, and the game could be frustrating if your team was out of sync. Many times fights in 6v6 could resolve until ultimates abilities came online. Couldn't. Correct that until ultimate combos could be executed to break through 2 tanks worth of mitigation supported by high and contested healing output. The world of 6v6 could have really high highs but really low lows. He's not wrong. One of the design goals of 5v5 was to try to raise the floor, even though it was the expense of some of those high moments. Overwatch 2 also has a greater emphasis on FPS gameplay. There's less damage mitigation and CC, and players get to shoot at enemies more. I agree, that is what they have been doing. Crowd control could take players out of the game for extended periods of time, especially when they were chained back to back. A 5-second summer hack may freeze on her primary fire brick bash. I actually have a really funny clip on my Mercy video that's coming out next week. I am stunned there, I think, for 10 seconds in a row without dying. You'll see when you watch the video. Insane. It's from back in the day in Overwatch 1. And that was a very, very consistent experience when playing tank. Razor Hold and Sigma Rock could all happen consecutively to one player. Typically a tank who could often survive the onslaught, at least in game. Their real life mental health was another story. Tank players are the most mentally ill players. Damage heroes often complain that their role is the least impacted relative to the strength of super powerful tank synergies and support heroes undoing their playmaking. Brigitte. A lot of DPS players were forced to play Brig. The emphasis on ability cooldown management, ult tracking, shooting barriers instead of players, and not big enough timing windows to just shoot enemies and get eliminations were all factors that contributed to this feeling. Support heroes also had to focus almost exclusively on healing since they were bigger than Deem, health boost, and more incoming damage on the field with additional tank player. In 5v5, they have more agency to add some damage or deal other heroes. That is true. The game is a lot more solo-oriented, less team-oriented. Tank synergy wasn't always fun. It slowed the game down and stabilized it, but sometimes it absolutely grounded it to a halt. People point to the double shield meta as an example of this. It wasn't just about double shields. The ability to stack a very defense-heavy lineup, especially in game modes that require the team to push through a small choke, caused a lot of matches to feel like there was no progress at all. Counterpoint, I do feel like they could have dealt with all of these annoying metas by just actually implementing changes quickly instead of just ignoring it until the problem grew too big to be solved. They could have implemented nerfs to the shields or anything else pretty quickly instead of forcing us to play this meta so long that we just quit the game. The game is faster now and doesn't typically stall out. It feels like there's more room to move around the map without the need to earn every inch of it. In 5v5, fights are often less focused on moving around in a death ball formation, and there's more room to take angles, flank, and duel other players. That is true. But is it true that people want to play that type of game? While 6v6 can have high moments, it's also hard to follow. Tracking 9 other players is easier than 11. It's still pretty hard, not gonna lie. Overwatch is a pretty demanding game, and moving to 5v5 made it a bit more cognitively manageable. Lastly, one of the biggest benefits of 5 was drastically reduced queue times. The chart below shows rank play queue times per row after the introduction of row queue to Overwatch in 2019, compared to the queue times per row in Overwatch 2's row queue format. Also, this is damage, support, and tank. As you can see, the shift to 5v5 row queue dramatically reduced queue times. That is actually a crazy statistic. 7.6 minutes average for DPS at Overwatch 6v6 post row queue and dropped to 2.9. That is a ridiculous statistic. I do understand their point in the sense that they don't want to change to 6v6 because of row queue, not row queue because of queue times, because this is more than half. This is literally half for support. And tank is not half. It's more like 50%. It is pretty important to have a low queue time in your game to actually make people engaged, because if they're waiting too long for a game and the queue time lasts longer than the game itself, then people don't want to play your game. So I do understand why they changed it. I actually just insane that the queue times have changed so much. I think putting this into perspective like this, like, it gives you an idea of why they even decided to do this. I don't even want to play Overwatch right now. Okay, listen, I will say this again. Back in the day, people didn't want to play Overwatch either, and now they don't want to play Overwatch either. I'm not saying it's because 6v6 or 5v5, but believe me, as somebody who's been playing this game for 8 years, since year 2, everyone's been complaining about how shit the game is. Okay, so at this point, I just keep moving. I keep chugging along. The biggest factor driving the difference between Overwatch and Overwatch 2 queue times is the ratio of players queuing for each row. We hear players speculate that long queue times are a result of not enough players playing Overwatch. That isn't the case, but instead that relative to other rows, players generally queue tank less, leading to longer wait times for all, while we wait for a tank to free up to find a proper match. In practice, the actual ratio of players queuing for tank, damage, and support is much closer to current 1:2 format than the previous 2:2 format. As a result, the 5v5 row queue format better mirrors actual players' interest in each row. The sharp drop-off in queue times in October 2022 is when Overwatch 2 along with 5v5 shipped. The queue times of all heroes dropped and are now much shorter than they were in the 6v6 row. This is almost all because the game required one less tank. If you look at the current queue times, you can see that there's still a lack of tanks compared to our other rows. Just flipping the switch and returning to 6v6 would likely cause a return to previous queue times or worse. Regardless of the amount of players in game, queue times are always reflective of how many people are queued per row. Since there are less players queuing than tanks, queues would likely go back to the way they were before. Thoughts on 6v6? The game started its life with 6 players in each team. I discussed why we moved away from 6v6, but doesn't mean it's without any merit. There were moments and madness that could happen with 12 players in a match that just don't quite coalesce when there are 10. Wow, what a word. It was almost too much to keep track of. Correction, was too much to keep track of at times, but that was a part of the charm. There are big moments in Overwatch 2, but they don't quite have that same chaotic over-the-top feeling to them. Part of the chaos allowed players to feel less pressure in a match. There was an extra player take up a bit of the slack for someone that was performing poorly, and since that player was a tank, they had quite a bit of impact. There was a lot of hit points and defensive abilities to burn through, which had a stabilizing effect on gameplay. We went over some of the issues of tank synergy earlier, but having 2 of them allowed one to focus on protecting backline, while the other held ground or pushed into the enemy team. I agree. because right now it feels really stressful as a tank player because I either need to dive and kill the backline or I need to protect my team. And if I do one of the two things, then I'm complaining that I haven't done the other, and it sucks. The tank role had a lot of depth in understanding how to work with the other tank. This part of the mastery curve took a long time to learn, and for the small group of people devoted to it, that was part of its allure. We mentioned the difficulty in balancing tanks for 6v6 earlier, but the past year and a half has shown us that there was issues with balancing tanks for 5v5. Just delete the tank row at this point. For much of Overwatch 2, tanks have been balanced, but when one of them becomes a powerful outlier, like Mauga, it can be felt strongly in the world of one tank. Okay, what's next? A lot of setup? Let's talk about the future, because the challenges mentioned previously were focused on making 5v5 the best experience it can be. However, because we operate as a service, to our players, we always remain open-minded to re-evaluating our decisions based on your actions and feedback to give you the best experience we can. That's good. I'm glad he said that, and I'm glad they're open-minded, because I feel like the old dev team would just ignore this and just keep chugging along and release one hero a year. Kudos to Iron for actually writing this blog, which is huge in size, and addressing it. And people like to talk shit about Iron and saying Jeff is so much better, but the truth is Jeff was really charismatic dude that people, how do I say, they felt like Jeff was a friend. Iron feels like a CEO of Overwatch, right? A guy that is in charge. He's still fun and he's nice, but he's not like evil or anything. He is trying his best to actually make the game as best as he can. Rather than introduce a disruptive permanent change to the game, we'd prefer to explore space further and make changes based on that exploration. He gets stuff done. With that said, we're looking at running a series of events to try out different core team composition formats in Overwatch 2. 7v7? The community has just once or twice suggested tests. Why not put various forms of 6v6 in the game? We are exploring how we can test different forms of 6v6 in the game to gauge results. This is taking some time, however, for reasons that may not be readily apparent. Sorry. I'm getting tired reading this blog, which is massive. The first and honestly largest reason is the need to do this in a way that allows the game to have optimized technical performance. With 12 players in a match, the frame rate would be pretty bad. There have been quite a few upgrades and additions to Overwatch 2 that have an impact on the performance of the game. These range from new features like allied outlines and enabling healer vision by default, the addition of more technically demanding hero kits, as well as visual upgrades to UI, heroes, and maps. In 6v6, these upgrades can have significant impacts for our players. Overwatch is a fast-paced game, and maintaining a game that runs smoothly across all our platforms is important for the player. What are my thoughts? I actually have a video on that, and you should watch it and click like and leave a comment. While a limited time test could arrive sooner, the team is still investigating exactly how long it would take to permanently increase performance across the game. This would be a large effort that would most likely take at least several seasons to accomplish. Another issue, and the one that still gives me anxiety about opening this Pandora's box, is what to do with queue times if enough players prefer 6v6 to keep some form of it around. I feel like the queue times are going to get much worse if we keep 6v6 around, both for 5v5 and 6v6. They weren't able to solve this issue. While we have some issues now, there's no guarantee that they will work. Is there a world where we are willing to live with long queue times to play this format? Maybe that's a pretty risky move to make. We also have tens of millions of new players that have only played 5v5. We want to be openly mindful not to frustrate those who like the game as it is today. The outcome of these tests would give us a lot of valuable information to consider moving forward. We'd run the test for a few weeks and gauge interest from the community. Then we'd measure the impact it had on the other experiences, Overwatch 2, like 5v5, arcade, etc. We'd like to take the lessons from this playtest to see what we can learn about the mode without the current game ecosystem and for the future of Overwatch. We would reflect carefully on the learnings from whatever test we run and explore how to best give players what's being asked for. Remove open queue, put 6v6 in, fixed. When you look at the changes to Overwatch since inception, it's clear that many of these have reduced some of the variety within the Overwatch match. We get feedback from some players that Overwatch can feel the same from game to game. While much of this gets attributed to 5v5, we feel there is a more at play here. Besides running experiments with 6v6, we'd like to run some of that, re-examine the ways we tried solving previous problems, specifically with the goal of bringing some of the freedom back to an Overwatch match. For instance, we think there could be other ways of putting a team together that aren't quite as rigid as set composition, but not as loose as open queue. We'll be running one quick play hack based on this idea. There are some gotchas to this direction, but after reading 400 pages of this blog, I hope you're able to see there are trade-offs to many of the decisions that go into this game. Your feedback has driven both our inspiration and commitment to testing new ideas in game. I don't think I've ever read this much. Okay, I'm lying. I'm an avid reader, guys. I read manga. Want to be super thoughtful about how we implement new ideas into the live game because there are millions of players who jump into Overwatch each season. Ultimately, the Overwatch team wants to continue building the game that you want to play season after season. This blog is just the start. This isn't the last time we're going to be getting into 5v5 or 6v6, and we can't wait to share more about our plans in the future. In closing, we appreciate you so much, and we love seeing your passion and dedication to the game. The team hears you, we see you, and we're incredibly thankful on this ride with all of you. Okay guys, stop whining, stop complaining. This is the 6v6 blog. You got what you wanted. How are you guys still unhappy? They're gonna test it out. We're gonna see what's gonna happen. At the end of the day, I know a lot of people are gonna disagree. I'm gonna get to have 5 million comments saying, no, Booger, you're wrong, you're stupid. But the truth is, making a rough switch right now back to 6v6 will create the same issues we had when we made the rough switch to 5v5, because there's millions of players that have never played 6v6, and we're gonna swap to 6v6, and there's gonna be thousands of people who are gonna complain about 5v5 being better. Make it a 6v5. Ah yes, classic. Either way, I like this. I like this blog. It's pretty good, and I think we should be hopeful. And so it's a nice response. And it's very detailed. So you should go read it, check it out, and thank you. Cheers. Cheers. Have a nice day. And now let's get into Marvel Rivals.